Hello there, everybody. Welcome to this webinar from Sweep, featuring the renowned analyst firm Forrester. I'm Catherine Nicholson from Sweep, and I'm going to be your moderator today. This session is all about getting you ready for 2026. So we're working out how to navigate the new sustainability landscape and deal with everything that's going to be coming up across the next year for you. Just to give you an introduction, first of all, to who Sweep is. We are the sustainability data management platform working with a really broad range of major brands, Fortune 500 companies and more across all 5 continents of the world and a host of industries. So just to give you a few examples, we work with Crocs, QVC, Burberry, L'Oreal, Travel and Leisure's Wyndham Hotels, CH Robinson and many more. I'm very pleased to introduce our 2 expert speakers today. We have Abhijit Sunil, who is a senior analyst at Forrester. He's our guest speaker today. And Freddie House, who is Chief Revenue Officer here at Sweep. So hello to both of you.
Hello.
Everyone, thank you for joining.
Let's start off with a little bit of housekeeping for everybody who's joined the webinar. We would really love to hear your questions to Abhijit and Freddie. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see the Q&A box and you can type those in there. We've reserved plenty of time to include these, so type them in as they occur to you and we'll come to those towards the end of the session. Right now, though, we're going to dive into the discussion. Abhijit, let's come to you first. We're asking you to look into your crystal ball for us via the Forrester 2026 Insights Report. Can you start off by telling us a little bit about Forrester, about the report, and share with us some of the key themes from it as well?
Absolutely. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and thanks, Catherine. I'm excited to talk about what's coming in front of us in 2026 because this is a crucial year for sustainability, thinking about optimization and so on. Forrester Research is a market research firm, and we look at various trends that are coming into the market and how can we stay ahead of those trends? How can we take action concretely within our organization so that we can be in tune with the investments that we need to make our organizations resilient. I'm a senior analyst with Forrester Research, and my coverage area is sustainability management and the various strategies that we need to put together for carbon accounting purposes. How do we make sure we are compliant? Secondly, I also look at climate risk analytics, which is an important area that is rising at the moment. And third, I also look at IT sustainability and the strategies that we need to put together. Interestingly, one of the common trends that we are observing at the moment regarding the question you asked, Catherine, is how all of these are coming together at the moment. The overarching theme for 2025 is to find returns on investments for the investments that we make within sustainability at the moment. And no better time to talk about that than right now. We had a big period where we talked about how sustainability would be crucial for business, but now is the right time when we are also looking at exactly which investments make the most practical sense, which of those investments are right in front of us and have a short return on investment versus a long time horizon, etc. So in our 2026 predictions at Forrester, and at Forrester we do these predictions every year. One of the predictions we made had been around the rise of climate risk as an important part of business risk calculations. And what are we saying in terms of climate risk? Climate risk are all of the physical risks that impact an organization and the transition risks that we need to calculate, but also risks associated with the supply chain. How do we think about making our business more resilient, etc.? And all of those are part of the calculations that we need to do and the sustainability related monitoring that we need to make. Some of the other trends that we are tracking are around sustainability management and how there are increasing efforts to find ROI and business value out of investments. AI is obviously playing a big role, and I'm excited to talk more about what we are finding and what we are hearing from clients about how they're leveraging AI for sustainability management and monitoring and reporting, and how does AI's energy consumption and the dual role that AI plays in helping sustainability, at the same time being detrimental for some of the sustainability targets that companies set. How is that balance being played out? And there are concrete use cases that we are seeing where AI can be extremely helpful in leverage in making resources we spend on sustainability more efficient. And on the other hand, we have to be very cautious about the use cases that we use AI for. These are some of the trends that we're watching very closely.
Great, thanks for that overview. And we're going to delve into all of those topics over the next 25 minutes or so. Freddie, to come to you, just picking up on the regulations piece there. We know we are still seeing that regulations around sustainability are fragmenting, they're evolving across regions. So for everybody who's joined this webinar today, who's having to deal with that in their day-to-day work, what are the most effective strategies for building a flexible approach to reporting so that they'll be able to adapt to emerging standards in 2026, whichever direction they take?
Yeah, it's a really tough one. I think that the sustainability landscape is evolving so quickly, and it's putting huge amounts of pressure on organizations. We work with, as you mentioned, Catherine, lots of large global organizations working in all different regions that have business responsibilities in lots of different regions globally. And the pressure put on organizations now for reporting is extremely difficult. And I think one of those key elements is just that so many of these reporting standards have huge overlap. There is just an enormous amount of overlap, which I think puts even more importance on the onus for organizations to make sure that the underlying data quality they're working with is as good as it can be. And then, having systems like Sweep, for example, but having then the tooling, once you've got that foundational data in place, means that you can have interoperable data reporting, which means that you can then use the work that you've done once for multiple different reporting lines. And that's such a critical way of saving time. And when we talk about sustainability, having to find ways to show return on investment, I think how we can streamline efficiency around both around managing data and reporting is really, really fundamental. I think AI is obviously the big ticket item that we're all here to discuss. And I think we're all very, very excited about what AI can deliver, but it can't fix bad data. It can only work with what you can feed it. And I think that's the fundamentals. This all starts with making sure that you have the best possible foundations from data to start with. And then I think everything becomes much, much easier from then on.
Certainly, that's the hope at least. I think for a lot of people who've joined the webinar, obviously they work with their own sustainability teams, their own direct colleagues, but a big part of what they do is sort of translating that in a sense to other internal stakeholders and helping other teams across their organization understand what's going on. But there might be a degree of fatigue for those other stakeholders around the changing regulations, especially if it's really not a core part of their job to be paying attention to those. So, how can our sustainability leaders who are watching today keep those internal stakeholders engaged? What would be the sort of core principles to that?
Yeah, I think it's I think to take a step back, I think one of the great aspects of reporting frameworks like CSRD, for example, is I think it's actually brought a cohesive strategy involving lots of different departments and lots of different departmental heads. And I think it's really been a great way of, I think, uniting organizations behind a strategy that really involves lots of different types of data. So it's no longer just something that's owned by the state sustainability function, but then has much broader implications for different departments across the business. And I think that it's really, I think that using that as an enabling function to shed the light on the kind of competitive differentiator that sustainability can offer, I think is really important. Again, we need to ensure that sustainability is delivering a return on investment for organizations and actually is helping organizations future-proof themselves to ensure that they can make great data-driven decisions about how their business practices operate. And it's not necessarily always about hitting sustainability goals. It's about ensuring that you can enable business transformation in a way that's sustainable. And I think that for me is the fundamental of actually being able to generate positive change across the organization and getting great buy-in. One of our customers is a Swedish manufacturer, and they have. I was talking to the head of sustainability, and he's a very interesting, very inspiring person. And he was saying that 50% of his role is actually going around the organization, and it's sales enablement is his role. So he sees it as a personal responsibility to actually go to the sales function that are out there selling their organization and growing their business, and being able to instill in them a clear picture of exactly how sustainability is a really important aspect of their product line, and how that's a competitive differentiator to them in the market. And I thought it was a really interesting point that actually, if educating their workforce on actually the benefit of sustainability is actually driving really positive outcomes for their organization. So I think it's initiatives like that I think are really important in binding people around the importance of sustainability.
Certainly is. Really interesting case study. Abhijit, to bring you in on this, any case studies on your side that you would want to bring in, or particular tips?
Yes, in fact, one of the predictions that Forrester had made on what we are tracking for 2026 is that at least three Fortune 1000 companies will be exposed to erroneous sustainability reporting. And I wanted to talk about that because this is very interesting, and we at Forrester like to make bold predictions where we would like to be as bullish as possible. We hope this doesn't happen, but we see trends that are going towards that. And I'll take some examples in just a moment. But the reason why this is important is the fact that many organizations, from our perspective, from our client engagements, we see still using fragmented spreadsheets, manual inputs for tracking their sustainability metrics. Their data structures are in various parts of the organization. Some people who may have been collecting some data leaves the organization, and the others do not know where this came from. And now, overwhelmingly, AI has complicated some of these processes as well. So in parallel, the reporting and regulatory frameworks across the world, the standards across the world, have actually enforced even more data assurance needs on sustainability data. So many of our clients talk about treating their sustainability data this with the same rigor as financial reporting data. So when we see still organizations using these manual inputs, collecting data ad hoc, and moving the data around within the organization across multiple functions, we see so much potential now than ever before for errors to creep into this, for AI-induced black boxes across various processes. And as when auditors look back at this data, many clients, in fact, end up paying more for this. So one example is an organization we recently spoke with, who spent tens of their employees over at least an year for their CSRD readiness. But they put that whole structure together so that they now will have less amount of those processes to be repeated every year. Now, the other aspect of this is how they had been typically dependent on consulting engagements every year. So, how do we minimize that? And we began our conversation talking about the ROI of sustainability being an overwhelmingly important topic for 2025. Having consulting engagements or service engagements every year for doing the same types of processes, be it in workflow creation or creating dashboards for sustainability, or even reporting every year onto the various regulatory bodies, is not sustainable in its own right. So putting into place a solution and a data structure internally where there is one source of truth for all of the sustainability data, and also there is a mechanism for automating this reporting process as much as possible, brings us 80% there towards our automation, saves on the most amount of resources from an ROI perspective as well. So our prediction is that companies who did not move towards that structure may end up finding themselves in hot water, may end up making errors, inducing errors that they eventually have to clarify to the market. Hopefully, companies will not have to do that. But now it's time to act on that. And this organization that we spoke with spend all these resources just on that purpose, and they actually are reaping the benefits now. A year later, for their next CSRD reporting, they have very little of that process to repeat. They have a structure in place already for all the data collection, analysis, and finally reporting, and then they are leveraging this as if almost it is plug and play.
That's a great example. Thank you very much, Abhijit. And obviously, you talked there about many organizations being reliant on quite sort of what seem old-fashioned methods, spreadsheets, a lot of manual methods. We, of course, have this magical new set of tools that we call AI that have really exploded in the last couple of years. When used judiciously, they can deliver real results for sustainability teams. And so, Abhijit, I'd just like to ask you for a couple of examples of use cases where AI could be most effective.
It's a very good question. So every opportunity we have to hear about AI linked with sustainability, among the first things we hear is about the energy consumption in data centers and how we have a lot of problems to solve associated with the heat coming out of data centers, the skewing of PUEs, and then how do we sustain the data centers themselves. We hear a lot of that in the press, and it has led to some trends in the market, such as, in fact, one of the other predictions that Forrester we made had been about the investments in the small modular nuclear reactors, and we are seeing already a lot of movement in that. We know that many universities are working on that, etc. But a very interesting use case for AI is in sustainability management. And this is a silent enabler that AI is bringing to the market at the moment. So when we talk about AI, and as I mentioned, we had actually at Forrester published a report which we titled Jekyll and Hyde. And that meant how we wanted to explore in the report. AI has both an enabling phase for sustainability, and at the same time all of this data center energy consumption, etc., those are all aspects of how AI may be detrimental for sustainability. But how does AI enable sustainability? Well, sustainability management, measurement, and reporting is at the forefront of that. And there are many use cases that are already mature that clients are very happy about seeing how fast they're maturing already. So we did a survey where we went out and asked clients who are leveraging AI already within their sustainability management platforms about what are some of the most mature use cases that they're seeing already. Amongst the top are abilities that AI will enable for peer benchmarking and in the reporting last mile aspects. So AI is now able to collect information about our past reporting, look through all of the data that is available in the market already about some of our peers, about some of our competitors, or how they may have publicly available reports, and then compare not just quantitative information, not just a direct comparison of our carbon footprint calculation, scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, but also in terms of how they're investing, how also in terms of how they're talking about certain aspects. And in an environment now where we want to avoid greenwashing as much as possible, this is critical. It helps us compare how we are spending our time versus some others. One of the other use cases that is top at the moment is about accurate emission factor library updation and matching and mapping to our calculations that we make. AI has the power to comb through hundreds and thousands of parameters to make sure that we are using the right emission factors and calculate any kind of errors, gaps that we may have already. These are all use cases that we are seeing already being included into some of the solutions. And lastly, I'll also mention that AI also has the power to make it easier for us to do more data collection from across the organization, breaking down silos that we may have otherwise had. So earlier, if we were to set validation ranges and set some deadlines for data collection from our stakeholders, be it external supply chain, from the supply chain, or internally, now we can monitor all of that with much better ease. And this saves much, not just time, but also money and resources across the board. So AI has the power to break down silos as well.
Lovely, thank you. And we have a comment from one of our webinar participants, Navin Malhotra, saying another use case for AI is to provide product level emission data at component levels. So really interesting to see how people are leveraging AI. Freddie, just coming back to you, as I mentioned, Sweep works with a really huge variety of companies, and all of them we know for sure are leveraging AI because they're doing so through their use of Sweep in their sustainability programs. AI really knitted through the Sweep software in many different ways. Have you got any learnings from any of those companies that might be helpful to our participants?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we've certainly been on a journey with AI. I think as many companies have. I think, about 18 months ago, we acquired an AI company specifically because we wanted to accelerate on this topic and really explore how this could be such an amazing way to really support sustainability reporting and sustainability as a whole. And what's been very, very clear is AI is not a silver bullet, of course. But when it's used sensitively to help augment workflows that are today very manual or potentially at risk for human error, it can be an incredible game changer. And tasks that could take days now can take hours and so on. And I think some of the use cases that Abhijit mentioned there, I think we're seeing firsthand the ability to use machine learning for tasks like emission factor selection at scale is extraordinary. It can really speed up some of those things. And I also think using agentic AI, large language models, the sort of conversational AI also has such a powerful impact. If you're compiling a CSRD report and it's asking you for qualitative insights that are buried deep within your annual reports, for example, it's a big human lift to be able to go in there and to dig out all the relevant materials in all those ESRS brackets. But again, using the AI that we've built into Sweep via what we call Sweepy, it's amazing to see how quickly that comes to the fore. Now, there are certain risks and downsides that you have to be aware of with AI. And we can certainly talk about some of those in a minute. But I think as an enabler, where used sensitively, it's really powerful. I do love what you said about the Jekyll and Hyde thing, though, because I think that's really important too. We are a sustainability business at our core, and we really believe in our mission. And it would be really irresponsible of us not to think about AI and the implications of AI, and the implications on the environment. So, we want to make sure we're conscientious in the way it's deployed. We're not using it on tasks that don't necessarily require AI. If you're putting huge compute on particular tasks within a platform that it's unnecessary, you're just effectively, you're creating emissions that you don't need to. And also we want to be very transparent with our customers. So we make sure that we try and we have the ability to show customers their own impact of the AI usage they're having on emissions. So we can make sure that these organizations can begin to track that. I think, as I said, it's really not a magic bullet, but where used sensitively for those workflows, it can really augment how people are working today and speed up the pace of being able to report. So sustainability's the professionals can focus on really driving positive change. And I think that's where we want to get to.
Lovely, thanks, Freddie. And just from a comment in the chat from Sharon Carr, could we be more specific about sustainability management as a use case of AI? Sharon's asking, do we mean for emissions reporting and measurement? I'd say we mean everything across non-financial data, but perhaps Abhijit, I'll let you just elaborate a little bit more on that, because I'd say it covers quite a broad range of things.
Absolutely. So when we talk about sustainability management or sustainability management software and the processes associated with it, we're thinking about three things that it enables. One is all the data collection for sustainability. So this could be data that we need for scope 1, 2, 3 calculations, and broadly our environmental metrics, including impact on the environment metrics such as biodiversity, etc. So all of that data collection and how we can have a central repository for the data, a data lake, if you will. And then secondly, how do we do analysis on that data? So we have the data from different stakeholders now. We may have had used that data for different purposes, such as even a materiality assessment or in understanding our scope 1, 2, 3 calculations. And then also we know what are the data points we now need for, let us say, preparing for CSRD. All the data is in one place. Now, how do we do the analysis on that? What kinds of analysis can we do? Can we map our targets? Like if we have a goal for 2030 for 55% reduction or something like that, then how are we on track? Can we do some of those analysis there? Can we make any analysis on the types of recommendations we may have for decarbonization levers and to map out which of those are priority for investments? And then finally, the third bucket is on reporting. All the data is in here. We have done analysis on that, which are creating for us dashboards, etc., that the chief sustainability officer can use and share with others like the CFO to say, look, these are all of our quantitative data, scope 1 to 3 emissions, etc., which we are going to report to the government. These are the dashboards that we can look at. These are our hotspots. Look, we have a data center here. If we do move to the cloud, this is the step change that it will make on our carbon footprint, not just save on costs. Finally, for the reporting part, if we are in California and want to report under the regulations that are coming our way there, or CSRD, etc., how can a solution help us automate that process as much as possible? For example, leveraging a template in which we can pre-populate some of this information already so that somebody can then go back and report all this into something like CSRD, GRI, CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Project, where we may be able to go and put all of the quantitative data already and then compare with our peers and others about like what is the best way to frame some of our assumptions, etc., and then put all of that together with as minimal labor as possible. So the sustainability management platform enables all three of these: data collection, analysis, and reporting. Now, when we talk about AI is trickled all over this. Like the example that Naveen mentioned earlier in the comment that Catherine read out about PCF calculations, product carbon footprint calculations being enabled by AI is an excellent use case. And when I mentioned emission factor matching, this is one of the themes that it enables for us to move from like product carbon footprint calculations using a methodology like PIA from MIT to like a life cycle assessment. So that might actually give us more granular info for us to go back and ask this data from others and collect all that. AI has great examples there. In fact, in one of our reports we published where we collected this data from the market about what are some of the most mature AI use cases, this was one of the most mature use cases. And we heard this even at New York Climate Week, where there's an ambition to go forward with that. So sustainability management platform enables all that, and these are where AI helps.
Excellent. And I think it'd be worth having a quick word, Abhijit, about some of the pitfalls for people to avoid when they're incorporating the use of AI.
Indeed. In fact, we just talked about like how AI is trickled across all of these processes. Now, what happens in sustainability management is in the inevitable process of auditing at the end, and that is a requirement for many of the reporting structures. And we talked earlier about the prediction that we made about how companies might make mistakes in this reporting if they are not using like an automated process, if they don't have a strategy for investing into a platform that will enable all the data to be collected. And the reason why that may happen is that if there are gaps in the data that is being collected, of if there are errors, what happens in the day-to-day of a sustainability head is we either find out very late that somebody did not input data. Like we may have asked a facilities manager for electricity data or something, it did not come in, or it may have come in a format that we cannot use or we have to clarify later. All this is extremely laborious task. AI can help with a lot of this. Freddie mentioned earlier about even how natural language interaction has been made possible with some of this data. So we talked about the analysis part of sustainability management. In that analysis, we can literally ask a question now and get answers. The CFO could ask a question about business value or financial numbers, can ask that to get that too back. But as we trickle AI throughout, we create black boxes on how we leveraged AI. Did somebody leverage the internal AI platform within the sustainability management solution, or did they leverage the corporate Copilot or GPT for actually populating or making a calculation into a sustainability report, or did they just put this all into ChatGPT? So how are auditors thinking about this? These are some of the challenges that are front and center at the moment. What we need to do about that is to work with auditors, understand the level of assurance we need for data, and then work backwards in putting great workflow in place from the very beginning.
Freddie, any thoughts from you on the risks and pitfalls if people aren't carefully using AI?
Yeah, I completely agree with Abhijit. I think the auditability is absolutely critical. I think if you can't audit what you're doing with AI, then you're just creating a faster and bigger problem for yourselves, I think, in the long run. And so I think, that's really essential. And that's certainly something we've worked really hard on to ensure that we can really provide very clear audit trails when using AI in our system. But I think for me, that organizations are also quite wary. We talk to lots of organizations who are really interested in our AI capabilities, but are a little bit nervous because of the implications potentially of what this could mean for their organization. And I think for me, we split those use cases into two, and I think they're both very important to consider. The risk related to machine learning tasks. So, for example, mission factor selection is sort of pattern matching. The data, your data as an organization will be anonymous, and it will go into a huge language model, a huge ML model. So really, you can't distinguish anything valuable for organization, and ultimately, you're training the system to be more efficient. So it's really going to help you out. So there's no risk to your organization with those sorts of things. I think the interesting thing comes when leveraging agentic large language models, and then being able to understand, hang on a minute, if I'm feeding it information about my business, is that going to go out into the ether, and then potentially, could there be a data breach here that's really important for us to get ahead of? And I think that is a big consideration. So again, we've thought long and hard about how we solve that problem, make sure that whenever organizations are using that functionality, it's only really leveraging their own internal organizational data, and that's going no further. But I do think it's really important just to make sure that organizations are aware of that when they're evaluating how they use AI, that if they're not really careful about the implications of the sort of where their data goes. And that's really, it could potentially be a risk for them alongside that audit risk that Abhijit mentioned.
Indeed, thank you. Some really helpful thoughts there, Freddie. So just to broaden things out, and this will be our last question before we head into the audience's questions. I think it might be a moment for some early New Year's resolutions, if November isn't too early for that, of course. I want to ask you both, if it's possible to say, what's the single most important capability shift or mindset shift that will enable sustainability teams to succeed and build that business value that they're seeking for their companies in 2026? Freddie, we'll come back to you.
Sure. Yeah. I think for me, the number one piece of advice I have for organizations is to understand that sustainability regulation is going to constantly evolve and change. And we can't afford to sit on our hands and wait for the perfect landscape before we invest in the right processes and practices. The CSRD is not going away. It might be changing form, but it's here to stay. The direction of travel for reporting and sustainability is clear, and that will withstand political fluctuations. And so it's really important, I think, for organizations to ensure that they future-proof themselves for the long term by investing in those things now, because it's not going to go away. It might change in the wind slightly, but I think that's the most fundamental piece of advice I would offer. And ensure that that you can make decisions now that are going to make your life much, much easier in the future, and future-proof your organizational decision making. Because as I say, sustainability is going to be at the heart, I think, of how businesses are operating in the future.
So that's very well put, Freddie. In fact, the point about regulations is super important. At Forrester, as an analyst, I hear a lot about the regulations and how that is changing. And one of the observations is, of course, how regulations are actually becoming more fragmented at the moment. We used to look at the market as if the regulations would be at a central regional level. However, now we are looking at regulations that are more fragmented. There are resources that companies need to put in just to understand if they need to comply with certain regulations or not, given they have a business footprint in certain regions. So if I had a magic wand, I would look at how I can optimize the amount of time, resources I'm spending on regulatory compliance. So the most important response I get from CSOs or heads of sustainabilities is about how they are actually spending more time on regulatory compliance and actually moving the needle around decarbonization. So, for example, in putting all this data together and in reporting versus actually putting together a circular economy strategy, or looking at their decarbonization levers and engaging with their suppliers, or even engaging with clean energy projects, and having a great process for a good pipeline for those investments. However, how do then we make the regulatory compliance piece as automated, as easy, as accurate as possible by thinking ahead of investing into solutions that may actually take us 80% towards our compliance needs, and then doing the rest of the 20% that inevitably we'll have to spend time on, such as perhaps double materiality assessments or so. So, if I were a head of sustainability, looking at how much time I'm spending on all of this, now is the time to actually consider how much time am I spending on various services externally. What are some of the themes that I should be exploring, such as risk calculations or product carbon footprint calculations? And now, how can I automate this process as much as possible? I cannot express how many times at Forrester as an analyst I've heard from clients about considering doing various in-depth consulting engagements, or either internally or with an external partner, in making some process such as like putting together a workflow or understanding their materiality assessments, which they could have actually bought as a capability off the shelf. And we are at a point in the market right now where those capabilities exist. So considering that is super important.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, well, that wraps up all the questions that I had for both of you, Abhijit and Freddie. We can move on to some of the questions that have come in from our audience. I'm going to skip right back to one that came in quite early on from Blair Parsons, asking, are you seeing any emerging social sustainability metrics that corporations should be focusing on in 2026 and beyond? Which social ESG metrics do you think should be table stakes right now for organizations? Of course, remembering there is an S in ESG.
Well, I can start on that. So when we look at some regulations like CSRD, for example, it actually has a very wide gamut. We talk about the E part, where we think about like the carbon metrics, for example, and some of the other environmental impact. But a lot of what we need to actually calculate for scope 2 emissions, scope 3 emissions even, such as our supply chain risk, our employees and their commuting, etc., actually translates into some of the social aspects as well, the social impact that an organization makes. So, some interesting ways in which I've been able to work with clients, and in fact, like having the S part be a support for the E part, is an optimization of like how there are various programs for employees, is in engaging with suppliers to make sure that we have not only least risk from the supply chain, but also understanding where the risk comes from. Like, is it because of the way the suppliers treat their employees, where they stand, etc. All that feeds makes the connection between E and the S part extremely close. And at the same time, focusing on some of those initiatives will also make our scope 1 to 3 go down. So I'll say some of the supply chain and employee aspects would be amongst the top in the S category. That will feed into some of the overall ESG category and helps us in some of the reporting frameworks as well.
Thank you very much, Abhijit. That's great. Let's move on to a question from Kirati. Sorry, I'm scrolling back up through the chat to find your question, Kirati, because you sent it in a little while ago. And the question was, how would artificial intelligence in MRV, which I assume is measuring, reporting, verification, or sustainability, affect environmental consultancy in general? It's a double question. Kirati also asking, with the platform equipped with more capable AI, will there still be the need for expert or consultants in certain actions like measuring, reporting, verification? Freddie, could I throw that one out to you? Either part of that question.
Yeah, of course. I mean, certainly, I think Abhijit is very well qualified to talk about the first part of that question and how this is transforming consultancy. But I think certainly, we can't get away from the fact there's still a huge need for human focus on this. Like we completely rely on machines at our peril. I think it's really important they augment what humans are doing. But I think the insights and the oversight of people is still very, very important in this process. And when I look at the requirement for expertise, again, the AI is really only as powerful as the content it's being fed. So where is the content coming from? And this is what I would urge, is ensuring that the content that is feeding the information is being derived from credible sources and sources that you understand the provenance of. And for me, there's a huge importance, more than ever, I think, for that level of expertise and for the rigor that we see here. I think what's really interesting is, we're seeing sustainability data and sustainability reporting being held to the same yardstick as financial accounting and financial reporting. And that's an industry that's been going for decades. And all of a sudden, in a very short space of time, the same standards are being put upon sustainability. And I think it's really important that we don't necessarily see this as a way of cutting corners, but a way of speeding things up so we can change our workload to ensure that we can focus on tasks that can really drive actionable change. So instead of spending all our time on reporting, we can look at actually how can we reduce emissions in our value chain? Where can we make actionable business change and a real return on investment for sustainability?
Absolutely. And very quickly to add on that, some of the use cases we talked about in our conversation today, the way it has evolved with AI is, so for example, earlier when we were calculating the scope 1 to 3 emissions and we were leveraging emission factors, that had been a huge task that AI has been able to fast track data collection and error correction in data and anomaly detection, gaps detection. Like let's say that we are working backwards from CSRD reporting as the North Star of why we are looking into sustainability data. Can we identify the gaps in the data that we have already? Or if we have done some calculations, some baseline assessments, etc., in let's say Excel spreadsheets that are sitting in multiple places within the organization, can we look at all of the data we have now very quickly, come to identifying the gaps we have in the organization, and then where we go from here, the various decarbonization levers possible, and identifying those and prioritizing our investments. So those all have been enabled or made faster but through leveraging AI. However, exactly like Freddie mentioned, to make sure that as we spend more time in our ambition to actually save costs and resources by leveraging AI, if we spend more time later on auditing more, then we are back at square one, and in fact, maybe end up spending more money than we end up saving. So, what I would recommend on that is the putting into place of excellent workflows from the very beginning. So where a advisory actually is extremely helpful is in the ability to plug into the right systems. AI and all of the platforms can get us very close to how we may need to do like a baseline assessment, leveraging very minimal skill set internally, even, which is a big plus. But climate advisory may be required for certain parts, such as like even moving towards like LCA calculations, or in understanding some of the regulatory requirements that are applicable for us, etc. So we'll see more and more use cases of AI, but at the moment, we have to make sure that there are workflows in place that doesn't make our lives difficult when we come to the auditing phase.
Thank you very much, Abhijit. We do just have time for one last audience question. So I'm very sorry to the people who've popped a question in and we haven't had time for, but hopefully among everything you've gleaned some answers to your questions. So just the last one from GS, apart from reporting or management measurement collection, are there specific instances that you see where AI is being used? Also, would you have a framework for deciding when not to use AI? There are three parts to this question, so I think maybe answer the part that speaks most to you, Abhijit and Freddie. The other part is, would you say that the efficiency gains made will get washed away given AI proliferation? And whether maybe some cap is needed is the suggestion. Abhijit, if you're able to take on any part.
I'll take a It's a great question. In fact, it's exactly
It
what
is
we
a good question.
highlighted in our report, Jekyll and Hyde, where we said, look, AI can have all these use cases, but if we don't use it at the right scale and for the right use cases, then we are actually spending more resources in doing something that we really didn't need to actually shove AI down its throat on. So we for example, energy monitoring in data halls is an excellent use case for AI, that where AI is helpful in understanding how we can tweak the power consumption of data centers in predictive modeling, basically for energy usage. That's that use case. Then reporting and the peer benchmarking. That's another excellent use case where we can be more accurate, save a lot of time, and also in helping with identifying the right decarbonization levers for us. So these are all excellent use cases where we are able to leverage AI. But the way to have the balance on that is to understand the or even leverage the sustainability monitoring platform itself to understand our consumption of resources in the cloud or in data centers. So after all, AI is running somewhere. So where is it running? How can we work with the places where our workloads are running, be it our on-premises data centers or co-location providers or our public cloud providers, or with some of the service providers, the SaaS applications we're working with, and understanding how has this changed in the amount of workloads that you're leveraging, and that is complicated, it's difficult, it's data that is really hard to come by at the moment. But working in that direction will help us understand the step changes that we are making as we avail more AI services. So the way in which we have been observing clients make that decision is to first ask ourselves whether AI is really required for certain use cases. And we can go deep into like some of the use cases where this is even more prominent. But the second part of that would be to help assess the changes of our workload usage from places where we run our workloads, and understanding if we can get more metrics on that. Difficult things to do at the moment, as we are very bullish on AI at this time, but really the right things to start thinking about.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much for bringing us all of those thoughts, a real whistle-stop tour through some of the things to look out for in 2026. Abhijit Sunil from Forrester, our guest speaker, and Freddie House, CRO at Sweep. Thanks to both of you. If anybody, any of our audience on this webinar would like any more resources, of course, you can visit Forrester's website, and you can also find out more about Sweep at sweep.net. For the time being, that's it from us. Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you very much for your questions, and sorry to the people that we didn't have time to get to your questions as well. Hope to see you soon on another Sweep webinar. Thanks everybody, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.